page 208. So one of the things that I've asked for the future is when we've got a large number of in a category. So for example, we've got 4 short-term rentals and 4 assembly use. I believe that those were in both those cases the subject of one complainant complaining about a whole bunch of them at the same time. So I think it would be useful to know that if we're getting a list like this, so we don't kind of think, oh my God, there's like, it can be that there is a neighborhood issue, and it isn't as dire necessarily as it may appear. Director Turnbull?
Yeah, and that is my concern about this, our ability to carry on having tickets. We do have a complaint-driven process, and from my point of view, that can be very unevenly applied when you have one neighbor who happens to have a heightened sensitivity or concern and doesn't hesitate to complain about that. So I have noticed that in certain areas that some property owners have to have higher standards than others. And from my point of view, that's not fair either. I don't know how to deal with that because I know we can't be out there as policemen all the time, but the complaint-driven process, from my point of view, has a number of issues.
So it's come up in the past. When do we cross over to the harassment side of things? And on the short-term rental in my area, that's come up recently. There's been a spate of complaints by one particular person, and I had a visit from that person's neighbor saying, "When I feel I'm being harassed? When does it turn into harassment? And how do we address that?" I understand with noise complaints, they have to be corroborated by 2 separate property owners. In a situation, in other situations where it's not so cut and dried, do you require that corroboration from more than one property owner?
To answer that, I know we've had some experience, particularly with poultry, chicken noises, where we have one party that may be really that objects highly to the notion of poultry anywhere in their neighborhood, let alone next door, and where that individual may consistently complain over and over and over. The bylaw officer will take that into consideration, and on the first step, the first complaint, there's always a talk with the owner of the chickens in this particular case to see if there's anything they can do and to see that if they actually comply with the bylaw with respect to keeping chickens in 15 meters from a property line, for example. So if they're compliant with the regulations in keeping them indoors, keeping them away from the property lines, and the neighbor keeps complaining about the same thing, that's when we'll take the notion, okay, that we've had a complaint, the owner's done the best they can to meet the requirements, in many cases have met the requirements. That's when we take a step where we need a second or even a third complaint, and we will ask the owner, the original complainant, to keep a log of the activities. So harassment works both ways. In some respects, is that the owner of the chickens in this case feels harassed because he's aware or she's aware of all the complaints from one neighbor, and we try to, I guess, not sit in the middle and sort it out, but we're sensitive to both sides of the story. And we'll deal with the complainant as well as the recipient of the complaint to the extent where we'll advise the complainer that you may be charged for harassment by other levels of government here. The RCMP might come out and talk to you, depending on what's involved. It's not as a threat, but just as an outcome, and that may already have happened because the owner of the chickens is saying he's My neighbor is always patrolling the fence. I feel I'm being watched. He's maybe trespassed. He's setting off firecrackers to disturb the poultry, and there's a whole number of things that could be involved. And it almost comes to a point where it's a civil issue between the two, and then they go to perhaps the RCMP for some resolution. But from a bylaw enforcement perspective, what we try to do is okay, if this person has a legitimate complaint, let's see if others in the neighborhood are actually complaining of the same thing. And collectively, if there's a group, then and compliance is not met on the chicken owner side, then we will definitely make sure that the owner of the chickens does comply to the full extent of our ability under the bylaws. Beyond that, the bylaws need to change. So from a harassment perspective, a lot of people in our experience will claim harassment under one complaint. They feel they have a right to have chickens, and if they get one complaint, they feel harassed. There's that mentality out there, and there's other people that say, well, I don't care how many people complain, I'm just going to have my chickens, and that's the way it is. They don't feel harassed at all by anybody. So it's a delicate, difficult dance that we have to go through in many cases. And I use chickens just as an example.
Okay, anything further on that report? Okay,